Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix. I've kind of been thinking a lot about my approach to life, my way of interpreting events, my way of understanding my humanity and my mind, my way of investigating and exploring the world, and thinking about how I think. And it's really interesting because I kind of would use an analogy of a wall or the wall, which is kind of what I think happens in our world for whatever reason it is, whether it's because of the human condition or the condition in which we find ourselves in with nature and reality. But my whole thought has been that we place a lot of constraints on human thought. And I really worry about this because it makes me feel like it's easy to think that thinking isn't important, which is often what I've internalized actually, because it often seems like it really doesn't matter what's creative or thoughtful. It's more just recognizing, does it fit with what society demands? And I'll admit, I've really struggled in my personal life and with things that have happened in my life to kind of not think in terms of rigid thought, to not have rigid thought, to not be rigid in my approach. And it's really difficult to internalize the opposite of what I would like to do, where you do become rigid. It's really interesting to use the wall as a metaphor. So when I was listening to Pink Floyd and Tool and some of these other bands growing up, that was always what I felt was like my thinking was limited by the world outside of me and that I couldn't do anything about that, and I was trying to break through and have my own version of enlightenment or understanding or insight. And it kind of sucks because when we hold on to our rigid thought too much, because that's what we've internalized, we end up in a situation where we limit ourselves. And we limit the progress that humanity can make through our contributions. And overall, we tear people down. And I really worry about this because I think that being able to think freely is important. I think that it has a lot of great things that it brings into the world. But it's so easy to internalize what we need to do to get through, whether that's with an economic system or with work, with life, with survival. And we kind of forget that there's all of these like arbitrary boundaries that differentiate thought on a larger sense. And so I recognize that that can be really hard to change. And I struggle because I felt limited in that way. Because I choose to be creative, because I choose to be thoughtful, almost brooding and melancholic, I end up in a situation where like a lot of my thinking is like just not really understood or appreciated. And like you can kind of deal with that because you can have thick skin and deal with criticism and you want to deal with the world as it is. But I also think there's an opportunity that's lost there in terms of my own sensitivity, for instance, but with thinking about how some of the best ideas that we could come up with are not presented because we are worried about what people will think. We're worried about doing it wrong. We're worried about not trying things. And so the wall is a very apt metaphor because we do erect these walls. Because we often see ourselves as being unable to find out what we really care about, find out what we really think, and being able to express that. And so we end up in a situation where we don't have much of a chance to explore it because we're often limited. And this rigidity, I think, with this wall erected between us and around us, I think might feel good in a lot of ways. Like 90% of people feel safe with their boundaries. I'm talking about intellectual boundaries, not interpersonal boundaries. But it can just be really interesting because we just don't try things or ask questions or be curious because of what we're afraid of. And there's a lot of reasons why this happens, of course. It could be the ideas that we've internalized since we were kids. It could be institutional forces like culture and, unfortunately, in my case, religion. It could be even because of the way that we're educated. So as much as I appreciated a lot of the things I learned in college, there were a lot of things that definitely could have been a lot better, I feel, in terms of inspiring investigation and curiosity instead of limiting it and limiting human thought and limiting human creativity. And I really think about it because there's this idea that we really struggle to let go of the tools that we use to deal with a novel situation. But that's what I want to do more of. I want to be able to think more creatively and more freely, and the kind of free play, you could call it. Because I do want to be able to understand my thought process and where I'm coming from and why I come to the conclusions that I come to. So it's definitely not ideal. There's obviously a lot of things that, I do think stifle and get in the way of kind of pure thought, you could call it, or at least pure investigation and creativity and curiosity. But I certainly think as my values, it's worth it to pursue anyway, no matter how difficult it is. And I think that that gives me a lot of hope. It's hard to do when there's so many institutional barriers, there's so many institutional walls, so many personal personal walls that we put up, as well as kind of boundaries to protect ourselves. And while that makes sense in terms of survival, and it makes sense in terms of the things that we need to get done, I also think that we do a great disservice whenever we erect these walls and we don't think past them. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. I hope you enjoyed this talk. I hope you'll check out my other videos on my channel. I hope that you'll check out my books. And I'm Phoenix. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.